Hey y'all, Mac here. That was a video showcase of my Blade Trap Trickster, which I have taken to level 100 in hardcore trade, and I have also somewhat min-maxed in terms of using a non-mage blood setup. And I have gotten to a point where there are still some upgrades that are just kind of gated by hardcore trade not having certain items or having certain gems or whatnot, and I'm also at a point where some of the upgrades are just massive in terms of cost, and obviously Mage Blood is one of those. I was on my way to get a Mage Blood, but I decided to do some other cool stuff instead, and that led me to just settling with this current setup of the build, which is still very tanky and is able to do everything that I wanted it to do so far, and I'm going to be taking it into testing T17s and Ubers, because I do believe the build is viable enough now for that. Now, that being said, I will go over kind of the sort of swaps, playstyles, and all that for the build, as well as what I've learned myself about the build in picking it up. And I will go over some of the defensive aspects and offensive aspects that you can scale to suit your software or hardcore needs. So the playstyle for Blade Trap Trickster is relatively simple. It's like any other trapper, except your traps deal damage with the bosses being inside of them. So as you can see, I can have up to 17 traps, 19 if you take both +2 trap nodes on the tree, but these are the blades that are going to be spinning, hitting the boss. Very simple. The thing is that if you scale AoE, they get bigger, obviously, which is going to maximize your overlaps. This is not necessary, really, for damage, and most of the time the bosses that you fight are probably going to move anyways, so it's more just about seeing if you can get uptime on the boss when they decide to stand still. And you do that by, a lot of the times, just standing still yourself, and this build is tanky enough to do so because we scale a lot of defensives. Otherwise, there's some things to mention. Sigil Power is good as a defensive. If the boss is in here, they're doing less damage. Gives you a little bit of damage itself, but since I don't spend that much mana, I don't really get that many stages. You want to play Bear Trap. Bear Trap is going to increase your damage dealt to them. It increases their damage taken by traps by 25%, which is a really big buff for damage. I'm using Conductivity as my curse. Since I'm not playing crit, I don't really need any of the marks. But this is just a self-cast setup. I don't really find any point in playing it any other way. I'm running a crap ton of auras because I have the Aura Mastery node as well as a Watcher's Eye for clarity, and Vitality is just there for the extra 8% damage, and I guess a little bit of passive regen. The actual movement skills that you can use for this build, you can use Shield Charge Frostblink when you're clearing, which I demonstrated in the video, and then it's really fast in that you can basically Shield Charge Frostblink right after, and you'll get an animation cancel of sorts. Or you can play Flame Dash, and Flame Dash is obviously really good for bossing because it's just an instant dash and it avoids all of the obstacles in between. I have Vol Discipline and Vol Grace, which are just some defensive Vol skills. I think they're pretty nice. You have an Enduring Cry Caught Arm set up to get endurance charges and a little bit of burst regen, and since we're taking Zealot's Oath, we get a massive energy shield regeneration proc. And when that happens, you can see it shoots up to 2500 ES regen, which is kind of nice for dealing with smaller degen and just keeping my ES pool high. Okay, I'm going to blitz over some points about the tree and some specific nodes. We're Trickster, these points are all really good, don't take anything else. These Ascendancy nodes give us most of our defensives. This Mastery right here is mandatory, as is this one, as is Ghost Dance, as is CI, obviously. Wicked Ward is also pretty much mandatory. You really want this. It pairs well with Spellbreaker, and Zealot's Oath is kind of the one that you can sub out if you want. I like it because I'm playing Enduring Cry with Call to Arms. You can opt to not play double clusters with 12 nodes, and you can path down towards here, get Divine Judgment. You can path through here, get Heart of Thunder. You can grab Arcing Blows. You can also grab the Saboteur and Elemental Focus nodes. And you can also path up towards here and get Instinct if you need more suppression. You also have access to some Jewel Socket nodes around here if you really need them. But besides that, this is nothing major. ES added to your stun threshold is really powerful. You really want this as a CI build unless you have stun avoidance somewhere else. And Fizz from hits taken as chaos damage. This is free 10% Fizz hit mitigation for 1 point, so really powerful. I think that you also should play Parandus Pact with increased ES, and you throw it into wherever you see the most points. Usually it's around here because you're taking all of these. Taking these would actually be pretty nice for me too, but I, again, opted to play 2 12-node clusters, so yeah. Okay, I'm going to go over some of the gearing options, and I will later go over how you actually craft everything. But first and foremost, Ephemeral Edge. This is necessary and non-flexible. You mainly want the scaling from this weapon. Blade Trap counts as an attack, so we get scaling based on our total ES, which is why we scale ES with this build. Corruption Implicits, you can have AoE, which is going to help with overlaps, but the base global accuracy can also just be good enough if you still need the accuracy. For the Hubris Circlet, you ideally want as much ES as possible from your prefixes. If you can leave 1 prefix open for % Fizz taken as fire, it's really massive for our Fizz EHP because our Fizz max hit is our lowest compared to Elemental, especially with a tri-ele flash setup. The suffixes here, you want int. T1 int is going to be better max rolled than Essence int. And the Haunted modifier of AoE is nice for this build. I hit this completely out of luck and on accident, but it is not necessary. You can have a res or an attribute here. As far as the shield goes, you literally just want a bunch of ES on it, prefixes. You're going to start noticing a trend. This is literally how a lot of my ES items look. Afterwards, you really just want int on the suffix to get more ES. And the suffix craft of suppression is really nice to fill that last little gap. The amulet, you can play a % increase in amulet until you can afford to craft a focused amulet or a simplex amulet. I would not recommend an Astramentus, to be honest. I think it's a crap amulet, and I think there are just better options. As far as anointment goes, you can swap out a Master Sapper if you're running like Eater of Worlds in hardcore and you don't want the reduced defenses per frenzy. That's really scary. But other than that, Master Sapper is just a really powerful node. We get 3 frenzy charges pretty fast. The Sadist Garb, you want triple T1 modifiers in your prefixes. This is in and of itself giving us a crap ton of ES and evasion. And paired with Trickster, it just makes us absolutely insanely powerful. The other mods you want on this, you can play reses instead. You ideally want an open suffix to craft the 6% increased attributes. But the most ideal outcome, in my opinion, is still getting T1 suppression, which takes a couple hundred. Definitely Essence of Spite. As far as this ring goes, the actual BIS here is going to be a helical ring with int and whatever else you need, all attributes and reses ideally. And the suffix modifiers are going to get a 50% boost to their value, which is really big for this build. On top of that, you can still have that energy shield on your amulet. On your ring. The only downside is you can't craft non-channeling, so you'd have to find it on your other ring, unless you're playing 2, in which case you're going to have to fix your mana problems somewhere else. I found this ring with Onslaught on hit. It's completely unnecessary. This was more used for mapping, but at this point I've just kind of accepted I'm going to use it. And on both of your rings, you really just want ES and intelligence, and everything else is filling what you need. I, at the time, needed strength here, so I basically looked for strength through Essence of Spite. But again, you can play any ring depending on what you need in terms of resistances and attributes. So for your belt, obviously Mage Blood is going to be best of slot here, but if you don't have a Mage Blood, you can play a % increase int belt. I was looking for int and ES on this, and then everything else is based on kind of what you need and what you want to play. I want perfect flask uptime even with reduced charges, so I got increased flask duration on here. And I also used a Veiled Orb to hit increased trap throwing speed, which I think is just nice quality of life. Makes mapping a lot smoother. Gloves, you want ES. You ideally want an open prefix to craft AoE. Again, AoE makes our build a little bit better in terms of overlaps. but it also gives us a +1 to our auras, which we're going to be putting in our gloves. For the suffixes, you really want int and whatever reses or attributes you need, similar to everything else. Boots, very straightforward again, maximizing ES, int, attributes, and obviously move speed. If you don't play move speed on boots, I don't know what's wrong with you. Yeah, there's literally nothing more to that gear, to be honest. It's a lot of ES. And thankfully with grave crafting, a lot of this gear can be made relatively easily, and if not borderline SSF. Like, it is absurd. I made most of my gear. In fact, I think the only pieces that I bought outright were just the bases, the synth bases, and obviously the amulet, which I slammed with an Awakener orb. So, as far as other items of note, mentioned Parandus Pact, it's very powerful. The percent ES is just really good, just due to the proximity of these nodes. For a Watcher's Eye, there's a couple options. You can get plus evade if you're mapping. It's pretty powerful. It brings your... It can essentially cap your evade to 95% because it's just a flat plus 8% if you get a max roll version of it. That being said, you can also play things like Movement Speed Grace, Suppression Grace. You can play something like this, which gives me Phase Conversion as well as a bunch of ES from Clarity. I believe actually this is giving me... Yeah, it's giving me just a little bit over 1.2k ES, which is pretty nice. And quite honestly, you can... It's very flexible. You don't even need a Watcher's Eye, but it's just really powerful item. I'm playing two 12 node clusters with attack damage while holding a shield. I missed both of these fractures, and I also missed 4 or 5 other fractures on clusters. It's a nightmare. Ideally, you fracture the 35% increased effect, and then you roll for a all attributes and int suffix with ES prefix. Now, I had to settle because of currency issues, so I just essentially went until I hit T1 ES and called it a day. One thing of note, if you want to play tri-flask setup, so only 3 flasks, you can run a Brutal Restraint with Balbala, and the Trader gives you flask charges gained if you have empty flask slots. And this won't keep perfect uptime of Quicksilvers or Quartz, but it will keep perfect uptime of the Tri-Ele flasks. A note for hardcore, and honestly even softcore, do not use these to cap your reses. For all that is holy, do not do that. Like, my reses aren't perfect without them, but they are. I'm not using these to cap my reses, because that would be very cursed. Like, all it takes is one ghost or any sort of, like, reduced flash charges or whatever, and you are no longer res capped, which obviously is really scary, even with a massive ES pool. Besides that, remember that if you have enough dexterity, you can use suppressed tattoos to fill your suppression gap. This build might need a path up to Instinct Right for suppression, so do note those do exist.